Hi, my name is Hauwa Ojeifo, and I am the founder and the executive director at She Writes Woman Mental Health Initiative, which is a movement that gives mental health a voice in Nigeria by empowering people who actually live with mental health conditions to tell their own stories, to co create their own solutions, and to advocate for their own rights. I am a human rights activist myself, and I specialize in gender and disabilities. And today I will be deep diving a little bit into gender equality and disability inclusion in the classroom. And one of the reasons why I am very passionate about disability rights and, of course, gender equality is because, first off, I publicly identify, I live with a mental health condition. And I publicly identify as a person who lives with a mental health condition and a psychosocial disability. As early as in 2016, I got diagnosed with bipolar and post-traumatic stress disorder. And, I have seen what it's like to have layers of exclusion, not just being a woman, but being a certain kind of woman and then having a disability, but not having what is even within the disability community sometimes referred to as a disability. So it's interesting for me to dive into those layers of exclusion and prefer some practical action and steps that, teachers can take in the classroom or we can all take in the classroom to ensure that layers of inclusion are thought through and, somewhat rendered to ensure that we have a more equal world starting from the classroom. And, with my organization, we've done quite a number of things, and our key focus areas are really, first off, in what we call Safe Place Nigeria, which is really about creating mental health support, virtual mental health support, and making it accessible to as many Nigerians as possible. We are ensuring that, first off, there is a toll-free 24/7 helpline all across that is accessible to anybody within Nigeria, 0800 800 2000, where, people can call in. We're in a country where there is no mental health at the primary healthcare level. And as such, we are constantly thinking and recreating and innovating and trying to plug in systemic gaps to ensure that mental health is, it is accessible as a right, for every single person and not based on your social class or, based on poverty and your education or where you were located and things like that. So that is definitely one aspect of the work that we do. We recently are launching a community in a couple of days called Safe Place Nigeria, powered by Facebook through the Facebook Accelerator, Community Accelerator. And, it's going to be a closed group where for as little as about $20 a year, $22 a year, thereabout, people can get daily access to mental health professionals, mental health resources, daily tips and content, exclusive content, whether it's in live streams, masterclasses, downloadables, worksheets, and things like that. And we're doing that, to bring mental health closer to the everyday Nigerian. So that's one aspect of the work that we do. On the other hand, like I mentioned, mental health, no mental health in primary healthcare level, but it's just understanding that Nigeria hasn't had a mental health law since 1958. And as such, we do quite impactful work, groundbreaking work, in fact, in legislative and policy advocacy, in ensuring not just that Nigeria has a mental health law, but Nigeria has a human rights respected mental health law. So as much as possible, we're raising awareness about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is for short UNCRPD. We're raising awareness on that and trying to, build some capacity and awareness in all our stakeholders and ensuring that, it's not just about creating a mental health law in Nigeria, but ensuring that this law, recognizes, promotes, and protects the full rights of a person who has a disability in Nigeria. And of course, the third aspect of the work we do is really in intersectional solutions. And it's important for me to note in our legislative and policy advocacy work, I was very honored and privileged to be the first person with a mental health condition to speak before the Nigerian Parliament, to testify before the Nigerian Parliament at the public hearing of the mental health bill in February, to urge, our legislators to, ensure that the voices of people who have mental health conditions and psychosocial disabilities are heard, to ensure that, nothing about us, takes place without us championing, the law, without us, being extensively consulted, robustly consulted, so that we, are the ones that tell people, the Nigerian people, what support looks like for us, what, a human rights respecting legislation actually means for all of us, what solutions mean for us, and what exactly is lacking within the system as well. So that was really a landmark appearance at the Nigerian Parliament in February. And of course, the third part, like I said, is called Intersectional Solutions, which is where we do quite a lot of work, intersections, things that have to do with disability rights and gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health and rights. At the moment, we're working together with partner organizations like RISE in the US in ensuring that the United Nations is able to listen and pass a survivors a sexual violence survivors bill of rights in essence, so that member states can adopt globally. And this is going to be the first time that perhaps that is done for what we call the shadow pandemic, which is sexual and gender-based violence. And I'm particularly passionate about that because with people with disabilities, there's a part of the conversation that we do not hear with regards sexual and gender-based violence. And of course, with all our work, we have been able to get a lot of recognition across the world. For me, receiving the award from Her Majesty the Queen of England in 2018 as a Queen's Young Leader, to receiving or being accepted into the Obama Africa Leaders Program in 2019. In 2018, also being a One Young World Ambassador to The Hague in Netherlands, being an AstraZeneca Young Health Program scholar, winning the first ever MTV Europe Music Award Generation Change Award, the first African, the first Black person, the first Nigerian to win that. Of course, also getting into the Mandela Washington Fellowship in 2020, getting into the Women Deliver program as well, class of 2020, and just realizing, first off, two other awards that mean so much to me: the Martha Bristow Fellowship at the Human Rights Watch. It's the Human Rights Watch Martha Bristow Fellowship. Martha Bristow was a disabilities rights icon who passed away a year ago, and she advised the Obama administration with regards, the American Disabilities Act, many years ago, and she has been a force to reckon with. She was a force to reckon with, and I'm really hoping that we can continue to champion what it is, with regards to disability rights. And of course, more recently, I received the award from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as the Goalkeepers Global Goals Changemaker Award winner. And it is something that I'm absolutely proud of. And as an organization, as She Writes Women, we're absolutely proud of it as well. So that's just to give you a bit of context in terms of, the work that I do, the aspect of gender equality and disability inclusion that I will be talking about. Because I do have a feeling that, you've heard so much about, disability inclusion as it pertains to physical disabilities. We don't hear a lot about, gender equality and disability inclusion as with regards to as it pertains to psychosocial disabilities, which is something that, of course, I live with, and it's something that we need to have more conversations around with regards, in the disabilities rights community. So I think the first thing I really want to point out is that when we think about anything that has to do with exclusion, because first off, when we're talking about inclusion, the very fact that we're talking about inclusion is that there is a layer of exclusion currently. So of course, I want to draw our attention to the fact that there are layers of exclusion. So when we think about gender equality, or I'm just going to zoom in on disability inclusion. When we think about that, a lot of times we're talking about accessible learning materials, which are all valid, as the Braille, the sign language interpreters, our teachers, taking on, leaning into more inclusive teaching methods and teaching aids beyond what the traditional way has always been. And, do we have accessible classrooms? Are there ramps, and things like that? But I think a lot of times when we even think about disabilities, we don't think enough about, people who have intellectual, mental, psychosocial disabilities like myself. We don't think about how that plays out in the classroom. And a lot of times what happens, and one of the reasons that I see recurring is that, it looks like, oh my gosh, this is such a big deal. And, why don't they have their own schools and things like that? But I want to first draw us into the fact that, when I talk about layers of disabilities, let's look at it this way. I'm a woman who lives with a disability, a psychosocial disability. And, I'm not just a woman, that's on the gender equality aspect. I am a woman of color. I'm a black woman. I am a black woman who is Muslim, who wears a hijab. I am a black woman who is Muslim, who wears a hijab and who lives with a disability. But that's not all of it. I am a black woman who wears a hijab, who lives with a disability. And who has a psychosocial disability that is even sometimes excluded when the conversation of disability is, being had. So you can see that there are layers of it. So when we're thinking about inclusion, we also have to think about layers of inclusion, because what tends to happen is that we have blind spots. And the more we think, we have it covered, the more we also need checks and balances, people and systems, to ensure that we're constantly checking our blind spots. Because what may work, generally speaking, when we're having conversations around disabilities, may not particularly be tailored to people who have intellectual, psychosocial, developmental, or, mental disabilities as well. So it's so important that when we're thinking about, gender equality at any point in time, or disability inclusion at any point in time, we are first understanding, or having a grounded understanding of the layers of exclusion, so that we understand the layers of inclusion that needs to happen. Because just the same way some people are excluded at stage 1, some people are excluded at stage 2, some people are excluded at stage 3, and like that, is the same way you have to bring about a process where those people are included stage by stage, so that we have a more equal and more inclusive classroom and society at large. But I think I can understand that perhaps you're watching this and you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, what is really a psychosocial disability? I mean, or what does that really translate to? And it is something that, by the way, is such a huge deal. I mean, it's one of the reasons why so many organizations, so many countries have not been able to, successfully implement the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's really about the fact that we have yet to change or really adopt this really what I find to be a fascinating and perhaps commendable way to look at disabilities. Because traditionally, when we look at disabilities as something that people have. Okay, perhaps for some reason you have a physical disability, maybe it's your legs, so you use a wheelchair, and so we say the disability is the fact that you can't use your legs, so that is the disability. So it means that ideally you should be able to do this, and then for some reason you are not able to do it because of whatever it is that you have. But according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, what you're really saying about disability is that it's not exactly the feature that you have. It is the fact that the environment has not adapted to your feature. And it is mind-blowing when you begin to think about disabilities as not what I have, but the fact that the environment has not adapted to my own needs. Then we begin to shift the focus from the individual, trying to fix the individual and trying to correct and tweak them into this set way of doing things. And then we move that attention to the society and ask ourselves, how can we ensure that the society is made and built and created for all people? And that is the question. That is the question that I want you to always have going forward into the rest of my conversation and even beyond. What are the things that we can do as a society to ensure that when you have stairs, just because somebody, had legs and the person could climb the stairs, the person recreated society in the mind of their own selves. How can we begin to be deliberate about the fact that different does not mean bad? Different does not have to be excluded. How can we begin to understand that disability is not that thing that you have, but that thing that the society is yet to have to ensure that it is adapted or it adapts to your own particular needs. And there is a term for that in the UNCRPD. It's called reasonable accommodations. And it is such a fantastic thing, because whenever we think about, they can't, maybe a person has an auditory, impairment, and things like that. The person uses a hearing aid, or would need like a sign language interpreter or something like that. We think about it as a burden, but we don't understand that these are rights. Even within the classroom, these are fundamental human rights. I shouldn't be less of a human being simply because I am not like the majority of people. And if you look at that in different kinds of contexts, you would now begin to see why this is such an important conversation when it comes to disability inclusion in the classroom. We have to all begin to realize that, just because some people are the minority, and by the way, this minority is such a large number of people, and it is actually understated because people within the mental health, and psychosocial disabilities are largely neglected from this part of the conversation or neglected from that data. We need to begin to realize why it is so important that even within the classrooms and in schools, we have to ask ourselves, how can we ensure that we are inclusive in our teaching aids, in our grading, in our metrics and indicators of success and things like that? Are we creating the standards based on one type of person and making it a standard across board, as against ensuring, sitting and deliberately trying to ensure that you are making reasonable accommodations so that there is no barrier whatsoever, or so that at least there is some level of a level playing field across the board? So remember that disability is not something that I have. It is something that the society is yet to adapt to me. And it is not always physical. So that is something that, again, I also want you to think about. And also, in going forward, what do we need to do? We need to begin to reorient, because all of what I've talked about is really the fundamental aspect of building on this. I will encourage you to read the UNCRPD and, all the articles, across the board, because I believe that it will be very helpful in really understanding what disability inclusion from the aspect of the most marginalized parts or marginalized group within the disabilities group, which is people with intellectual, developmental, mental and psychosocial disabilities. It's really being deliberate in how can we ensure that we are meeting the needs of everyone, and not just the people that we have somewhat subconsciously created as the poster people of the disability rights community. And moving on from that, I want to talk a little bit as to what next. What do you do next after receiving all of this information? How do you really take this to the classroom? And I usually laugh a lot when people say talk is cheap, because it's not. Everything really starts at conversation level. How do we take these conversations into the schools, into the classrooms? We have to start the conversations. And I believe that we just need to start it in the first place. I believe one of the things is that we're so conscious about doing it right that we don't even start doing it at all. And that's something that is so important. We can facilitate it without having to direct, facilitate it is just really trying to guide the conversation without having to be the ones to lead the conversation per se. So I believe that indeed it starts with that. And I believe it's also very interesting that, the classroom is such a powerful place, because a lot of what we see, when we grow up as adults and even as children, the way we see the world is first off in the home and then in the classroom. So it's like, which is even more powerful, because when you really think about it, just the same way we are, studies show that we spend more of our time in the workplace, we actually spend a lot of our time in the classrooms as well, and it's important that how we create the classroom can sometimes, I would even go as far as saying that is how we recreate the world. So if we do not see different kinds of people in the classroom, then we might want to start, looking at how can we acknowledge and name different kinds of people, because I believe that one of the things that is a hindrance to that is the perception of young children or or teachers, in the sense that these people are not part of us. I think it's realizing that difference again is not bad, and one of the somewhat like one of the barriers to that is really that what we don't understand, we tend to reject, right? So we don't understand so many of the disabilities. Sometimes we don't understand psychosocial disabilities or intellectual disabilities. So what we do is that we push it away. We push it far from us. And that tends to be the problem. So it's so important that first off, we need to confront that bias within ourselves that says, this is the normal. This is normal. This is not normal. No, it is all different kinds of normal. It is all different. It is different people, but realizing that no one person is more important, but how can you make reasonable accommodation to ensure that every kind of person is well catered to within your space? At least they are included in your space. And I believe it's really about having the conversations with young minds to ask them, show different pictures, talk to them. What does this kind of person mean to you? Who lives with maybe a brother or a sibling, or maybe you have somebody who has like a developmental difference, like maybe autism. What does that mean in the learning environment? How does that show up in school and outside of the school? How does that show up going forward? And how can we ensure that we don't have a myopic, a very, very slim view of the world? How can we broaden our views? One of the biggest mistakes we make in championing anything that has to do with disability inclusion, especially when the topic of gender equality, is also on the table, is that we're trying to bring out the solutions by ourselves without really engaging the people who are most affected by it. Talk to the students, talk to the pupils, talk to the children, talk to other, children with disabilities, talk to girls, talk to boys about girl issues, talk to girls about boys issues, talk to people with disabilities about, issues that affect them, talk to people that do not have these disabilities with how they perceive them. Let them talk to each other. These are things that can be done right there within the classroom, and let it be safe enough for people to say, this is what I was brought up to think. I thought people like this were dumb and people like this are like this. And then you begin to, when you start the conversation, first off, you are breaking down the barrier of making it a taboo topic. Because one of the things that makes it really hard to talk about these topics is that fear of, I don't want to say what I really have in my mind, and because it's going to come across a certain kind of way. But when we really create an environment that is safe, that, people can bring their full selves into, people are more likely to tell you exactly what they think about certain issues, and they are more likely to tell you, how can we change this perception? And it's really about bringing all of that to the table. I believe a lot of exposure is important. When people experience people with disabilities and experience what it's like to really have reasonable accommodations in place, we see possibilities, and possibilities is all that we really need. We see possibilities, and again, it's not that it's a burden, it's a right. So when you do it, it's not that you're doing a favor. It's not that you're trying to ensure that your place is inclusive of all people. It's reorientation. It's rethinking what normal is. It's having conversations to say, what is normal? Who is a normal person? And who is a person that is not normal? That's a fantastic place to start that conversation. And then from there, we can begin to ask ourselves, what if different doesn't have to be abnormal? What if just because somebody doesn't fit this doesn't mean that the person doesn't have equal rights, doesn't have the full access to our own spaces? These are fantastic ways to start the conversation. And of course, just to wrap all of this up, is what next? As you go back, as you listen to more conversations around this, as you listen to, as you go back into the classrooms as well, you're thinking to yourself, what next? You and the students, who is missing? One of the things I would like to tell people is, who is missing? When you're making any decision regards, classrooms or learning, whether it's the management of the school or within just the classroom, I always tell people, whether it's in the workplace or in the classroom or wherever it is look around you and ask yourself, who is missing? Who can I pull in to this conversation to enrich the quality of the conversation in a way that perhaps I cannot do it? Why that is so powerful is that it helps us to cover our blind spots, because we all have biases that perhaps we're not always aware of. And then the more diverse the group of people that you're able to put in there, the more you are able to say, oh, okay, I totally was blindsided by that. One of the things that reflects downwards, and it's interesting, we talk about it a lot in gender equality, why we have to have, for example, more women in management positions or in decision-making roles, but then we don't think about the fact that, we need more people with different kinds of disabilities, in those positions as well, so that, they're able to bring that reflection into, they're able to reflect all of the needs and reasonable accommodations and the rights of all of these, disability groups into your policies, your processes, and your practices as well, within schools and workplaces. Like I said before, different doesn't mean bad. It's very, very important to reinforce that and reinforce the fact that when people don't understand something, they reject it. So it's absolutely important that we begin to reorient ourselves. We begin to rethink normal. And if we do not do it on a personal level, then that's when we begin to have breakdowns and, we begin to have such toxic workplaces or classrooms or schools for people who have disabilities as well. So I do hope that I've been able to give you layers of context to understanding gender equality, but also understanding it from a disability rights perspective, but not just generally in disabilities, but really understanding intellectual, developmental, psychosocial disabilities, and how we can ensure that we're including, an often marginalized group in what we do. Please do pick up the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It is a very, very helpful tool to understand the crux and the mantra of that, one of the most impactful pieces of legislation or, conventions in the United Nations. The mantra being nothing about us without us. So whatever you're going to do next, make sure that from top to bottom, whether it's at management level, whether it's at the parent level, whether it's at the students level, whether it's at the teachers level, you are deliberately infusing people who have disabilities and people who are of marginalized genders into those places, so that it is more organic in reflecting that into, the general environment within the school, place, or the classroom. On that note, thank you so much for listening. Once again, my name is Hauwa Ojeifo, and I work across social media at Hauwa_Ojeifo. My organization at She Writes Women, and I look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you so much. Bye.